Hello, everybody. This is Mike Harrigan coming to you live from the Braining Center in Leesburg, Virginia. Welcome to another edition of Brain Buzz with Mike. Today, we are going to talk about, it's a continuation of a discussion we started last week, and it's regarding the topic of diabetes and the brain, right? Last week, we talked about how devastating diabetes is to the body, but more importantly, we talked about the brain and how it affects all the systems of the brain. Remember, anything that affects the brain and affects the body, and everything that affects the body affects the brain. Well, diabetes is devastating to both, and then that just compounds everything, okay? So today we are going to talk about how we just determine if we are at risk for developing type 2 diabetes, and then what we can do to try to stave it off, to prevent it, or minimize the risk of the type 2 diabetes, okay? So first, a couple of facts. Over 30 million adult Americans have type 2 diabetes, okay? Or have diabetes. 90 to 95% of those people have type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is the type of diabetes you get later in life. You're not born with it, and it's something that's by and large preventable via our own behaviors, okay? So 30 million adult Americans have diabetes, most of which is type 2 diabetes. On top of that, another 80 million adult Americans, 1 out of 4 adult Americans is pre-diabetic. And what the statistics all show now is that up to 70% of those folks that are pre-diabetic will go on to develop full-on type 2 diabetes, which is unconscionable. It's horrible. It's terrible, right? Because it is so devastating to us. All right, but those are the facts. If we have high blood sugar, we're very likely to become pre-diabetic, and if we're pre-diabetic, most people go on to develop diabetes. All right, here's the good news: it is preventable. In fact, even if you have diabetes, type 2 diabetes, your behaviors, changing your behaviors and actions, can actually minimize the consequences of that, can reduce the complications of that diabetic situation, and possibly even take you out of the condition of having diabetes to not being diabetic anymore. If you're pre-diabetic, your behaviors absolutely can reduce the risk of the possibility of you becoming diabetic. All right, that's the good news. So first things first, got to figure out what is our risk factor. How do we know if we have a higher risk likelihood of developing type 2 diabetes? There are many factors, but here's what the American Diabetes Association has to say on it. All right, here's some of the more important risk factors. First of all, if you're overweight and physically inactive, you have a higher propensity of developing type 2 diabetes. That's the number one risk factor. Number two, if you happen to be carrying that weight in your midsection, your abdomen, that area, that is specifically a more troublesome type of fat, and will actually have a much higher likelihood of leading to diabetes. Third factor, age. The older we get, the more likely we are to develop diabetes. Abnormal cholesterol levels. If our cholesterol levels are out of whack, that is a risk factor. High blood pressure, really anything over 130/80 is something we want to talk to our doctor about and potentially be concerned about. All right. If our immediate family members had or have type 2 diabetes, that puts us in a higher risk category for ourselves developing the same disease, right? If you've had gestational diabetes, which is a pregnancy-related type of diabetes, you're in a higher risk factor. And then there are certain ethnic groups who are, by their very nature, in a higher risk category for developing diabetes, and those include Latinos, African Americans, Native Americans, Pacific Americans, and Asian Americans. All have a higher likelihood of developing type 2 diabetes, okay? So the American Diabetes Association, here's what they have to say on that. First of all, anyone over the age of 45, you should get screened. There's a simple screening test to see if you're pre-diabetic or diabetic. Anybody over the age of 45 should go and get checked. If you're under the age of 45 and you're overweight, you need to be concerned. If you're overweight and have one of the preconditions that I listed earlier, they recommend that you go ask your doctor to get pre-screened to see if you're pre-diabetic or diabetic. And then even if that comes up negative, depending on the risk factors that you have, they recommend that you go and get retested every 1 to 3 years. All right. So, and if you're not sure, go see your doctor. All right. All of this is all predicated on see your doctor and take their advice. All right. So now, here, what can we do to reduce our risk of developing diabetes or even becoming pre-diabetic? Here's the things we can do. First and foremost, diet. And the number one thing on the diet side is cut out sugars and refined carbohydrates. We hear about this all the time. We know how horrible it is for us, but here are the facts. It is devastating to our system and really, really hurtful when it comes to opening ourselves up to the possibility of developing diabetes. Bottom line is that insulin is a hormone that we produce, and the purpose of insulin is to get sugar out of our bloodstream and into the cells of our body. We talked in an earlier discussion about how important oxygen and glucose are to our bodies. That's how we do everything. That's how we generate our energy. It's called metabolism. And so getting that sugar into the cells of our body is critical, right? And insulin is a hormone designed to get the sugar out of our bloodstream and into the cells of our body. The problem is if we're pre-diabetic, our body's cells become resistant to the insulin, all right? And sugars and refined carbohydrates create this vicious cycle that causes us to have higher blood sugar levels, right? Which means that we need more insulin, but it also causes us to become more insulin resistant. And it's this vicious cycle where we end up higher blood sugar levels, needing more insulin, becoming more insulin resistant, and on until we become diabetic, all right? So the long and short of it is cut out sugars, cut out the refined carbohydrates, okay? Other tips for healthy eating. Eat more leafy greens, romaine, kale, spinach, collards. Those are all good, healthy things to be eating. Lean proteins are fantastic for fish, chicken, pork, those types of things, okay? Lots of fibers. You may not know this, but raspberries are an amazing source of fiber, the highest fiber fruit there is, one of the highest, all right? Healthy fats, lots of healthy fats like nuts and seeds, avocados, dark chocolate in moderation, everything in moderation, fatty fishes, right? The things we want to cut back on, we want to cut back on salty foods, okay? We don't want to be salting our food as much or have salty foods as much, right? And a good rule of thumb really is to fill half your plate with non-starchy vegetables, okay? Those are some tips for healthy eating, but if you want to have some really good deep dive information on some great diets, I highly recommend the Mediterranean diet. We'll talk about some of these in a later discussion as well, but the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, DASH as in DASH, is a diet specifically designed for people concerned about diabetes. And there's actually one that's actually Mediterranean DASH where they combine the best practices of both of those into one healthy eating regimen. Highly recommend you Google search that. Okay, so other things you can do to help to reduce your risk of diabetes. Portion size is very important. Believe it or not, studies have shown that if you're eating too much food at one time, gives you a higher blood sugar level and increases your insulin resistance, okay? So portion size is an important thing as well. Drink lots of water. Water is the most natural beverage there is, and it is many studies showing that the many benefits of drinking water. And also, if you fill up on the water, it will reduce your likelihood to be going and drinking some of those sugary beverages, things like soda and punch, where all the studies show how terrible those drinks are for you. They raise your blood sugar levels. They raise your resistance to insulin. They are very, very bad for you, okay? And here's some more bad news on that front. Artificially sweetened beverages and fruit juices, they're no good for helping to prevent diabetes. Water is your best beverage for preventing the diabetes, okay? Now, another very, very important thing that you should be doing every day, really, to reduce your likelihood of developing type 2 diabetes is exercise regularly. When we exercise, studies have shown that we need less insulin to keep the blood sugar levels low and under control, okay? And that's very, very important. So exercise is vital. And what they've shown is that moderate intensity exercise will actually reduce your insulin resistance by 51%. Think about it. Moderate exercise reduces it by 51%. High intensity exercise actually cut it by 85%. All right. Other things on that front, they've shown that many different types of exercises are helpful for you. So whether it's aerobic exercise or high intensity interval training or strength training, those all have been shown to benefit, to be of benefit when it comes to fighting off diabetes. All right. They've also shown that any exercise is good, but the more you work out, the better the results seem to be with regard to fighting diabetes. Okay. So when you look at that as a whole, what should you be doing? Well, try to find an activity that you enjoy, something that you can do often. Is not hard to do. You can do it, easily, whether it be running or biking or something that doesn't require a lot of preparation, and something that you're likely to do for long periods of time ongoing throughout your life. All right, but definitely start to engage in a daily exercise. All right, to follow along with that, it goes in the same vein, but it's not exactly the same thing. They say a sedentary life actually is very, very bad for diabetes, for opening you up to develop diabetes. In fact, one study showed that the most sedentary people had a 91% higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes than the people on the lower level of sedentary life, the more active people. So the less active people were just throughout the day, not just during the exercise period, but throughout the day, the more or the less movement you had, the higher your likelihood of developing type 2 diabetes. So what can you do? Well, what I do, I've started, I get rid of my chair in my office. I stand when I'm at my desk as much as I can. If you need to, just get the chair out of your office. If you can't do that all at once, maybe if you work with somebody else, share a chair so you can only be standing sitting half of the time. Set an alarm to go off every hour or 2 hours to just take 2 or 3 or 5 minutes to walk or walk in place. Get a balance ball or a balance board where you can balance on it throughout the day. Just keep the body moving, okay? Move. All right, last thing, or not the last, but one of the last things here is if you're overweight, you need to take care of it. It's one of the primary risk factors is being overweight, especially if you're carrying that weight in your midsection. You need to take care of that. Studies show that the more weight you lose, the lower your level of developing type 2 diabetes, assuming you are overweight, right? But any weight loss, it shows that any weight loss for an overweight person has a very dramatic impact on reducing your likelihood of developing type 2 diabetes, okay? Another thing, the final thing in this list of things, recommendations here, is if you're a smoker, I shouldn't even have to say this. If you're a smoker, stop smoking. It's horrible for yourself. It's horrible for everybody around you. Huge, strong links between smoking and diabetes. They've shown that people who quit smoking, even if you already have been smoking for a long time, people who quit smoking have shown a reduction in their likelihood of developing type 2 diabetes over the long haul. All right. So in summary, basically here's what we're saying. High blood sugar and pre-diabetes, worst case diabetes, they're horrible for you. It doesn't even matter if you have diabetes. If you're pre-diabetic, you need to worry about that. Even if you're not pre-diabetic, if you have a high blood sugar level, we talked about this last week, the higher the blood sugar level, the faster your decline in cognitive function. You just need to get your blood sugar level under control no matter what, all right? It's terrible for you if you don't, all right? But the great part is it is preventable. If they're not really complicated behavior changes, it's eating right, it's exercising, and getting rid of the things that that we talked about that are really bad for you, smoking and otherwise, all right? Next week, or in a later edition, we're going to talk about ways that we can actually implement some of these things. So those are the things you want to do, but it's always easy to say this is what you should do. The much harder thing is to actually do it and continue to do it. So in a future Brain Buzz, we will be talking about the science behind human nature, the science behind forming habits and breaking habits, and the ways you can leverage your brain, the way your brain operates, so that you are more able to create good habits, break bad habits, and retain those better behaviors in the long run. All right. Hope that was helpful. As usual, I look forward to seeing you again next Tuesday, and I hope you have an awesome week. If you have any questions, you can email me at the Braining Center at headstrong1.com. So again, that's Braining Center at headstrong1.com. Thanks again, and have an awesome week.